You don't have a bra on, right?
No, ma'am.
No pockets?
Nope.
One time.
I know my law, bro. I don't have to be detained. I'm not. If you're not.
Bitch, get your ass off. I'm knowing. Don't be having shit to fucking do.
The distinct growl of a lime green Dodge Charger Hellcat idling in the humid air of Ocala, Florida, marked the beginning of a felony investigation on July 7, 2022. The high-performance rental vehicle sat parked outside a Regions Bank branch while the summer sun beat down on the asphalt. Inside the financial institution, a silent alarm had been triggered by a transaction that the bank manager believed to be a sophisticated crime in progress. Officers from the Ocala Police Department alongside Officer Hunt from the neighboring Bellview Police Department converged on the scene with the expectation of intercepting an organized ring of fraudsters. The call to dispatch described a group of suspects attempting to cash duplicate checks at multiple branches across Marion County. This was not treated as a simple misunderstanding, but as a coordinated attack on the banking system involving a green Hellcat rental and 4 suspects. The initial approach of the officers was tactical and guarded as they surrounded the vehicle to detain the occupants. The driver of the powerful muscle car sat behind the wheel, appearing confused by the sudden swarm of law enforcement. An officer approached the driver's side window to secure the scene and initiate the investigation into the alleged bank fraud. The officer established the tone of the encounter immediately by stating, "The reason why I am talking to you is about some stuff going on with the bank." He requested the driver's license and the rental agreement for the vehicle to identify who was in control of the car. The driver fumbled through the center console to find the paperwork while trying to explain his presence at the bank. He told the officer that he was simply providing transportation for a friend who needed to conduct a transaction. The driver stated with a tone of casual innocence, "I just took her to cash her check and that is it." He explained that the group had traveled from Orlando and had made stops at other locations. The officer pressed for specific details regarding their movements earlier in the day. The law enforcement official asked what happened in Bellview over there. "That is what we are talking to you guys about." The driver admitted that they had stopped at a branch in the neighboring town, but minimized the significance of the event. He clarified his role by saying, "Just to be clear, took her to Bellevue to cash a check and that is it." The admission of visiting multiple banks in a short time frame heightened the suspicion of the officers rather than alleviating it. While the driver was being questioned outside, another officer entered the bank to locate the female suspect named Genesis Parrott. She was standing near the teller counter dressed in blue medical scrubs, which would later become a focal point of the investigation. The police ordered her to step outside to discuss the validity of the check she was attempting to negotiate. Genesis wore a face mask, which was a common sight in 2022, but viewed by police as a potential identity concealment tactic in fraud cases. The officer escorted her to the side of the building away from the curious eyes of the bank patrons. He asked her to remove the mask and posed a direct question about her intent. He asked, "So you came here to cash a check, is that check a good check or a bad check?" Genesis appeared defensive and unsure how to answer the binary question posed by the investigator. She hesitated before answering, which the officer interpreted as a sign of deception. She eventually explained that the check was an insurance settlement that she had received in the mail. She stated, "I was given to you by who check, so that way they took me to come cash." Her grammar was fragmented due to the stress of the detention and the accusation of a serious crime. The officer pressed her on the source of the funds and why she would not know if the check was valid. She insisted that it was mailed to her and she was simply trying to access her funds. The investigation hinged on the information provided by the bank manager, who was adamant that the check was fraudulent. The manager informed the officers that the specific check number had already been flagged in the system as cashed. He claimed that the female suspect was attempting to cash through 3 checks that had already been cashed the previous day, each for $3,000. This specific detail created the probable cause for the detention and the subsequent search of the vehicle. The police believed that Genesis was a participant in a check-cashing scam where duplicates of real checks are printed and cashed at different locations. The officer confronted Genesis with the fact that she had been rejected at the Bellevue branch just an hour earlier. Genesis admitted that the previous bank would not accept the document, but claimed ignorance regarding the reason. She told the officer she did not know why they declined it and that she just moved on to the next branch. This behavior fits the profile of a money mule in the eyes of law enforcement. A mule is often instructed by a handler to take a check to multiple banks until one teller makes a mistake and cashes it. The officer asked her why she was getting an insurance check and if she had made a claim. She struggled to provide the specific details of the insurance claim, stating it was just sent to her. The officer summarized her position skeptically by saying, "You did not make any claim you had a check that is just made out to you." The tension escalated when Genesis asserted her knowledge of the legal system to the officer. She grew frustrated with the line of questioning and the implication that she was a criminal. She told the officer, "I know the law and my sister is a cop." This attempt to establish a connection to law enforcement often fails to gain traction during a field interrogation. The officer remained focused on the discrepancy between her story and the digital evidence provided by the bank. He viewed her defensive posture and her invocation of her rights as obstructionist rather than cooperative. The officer decided to detain her further and placed her in handcuffs while the investigation continued. The focus of the police work shifted to the green Dodge Hellcat and the other 3 passengers waiting inside. The officers conducted a probable cause search of the vehicle based on the allegations of organized fraud. Inside the car, they discovered items that seemed to corroborate the theory of a mobile forgery lab. Wedged between the driver's seat and the center console was a FedEx envelope containing 3 pages of blank checks. The discovery of blank check stock is a critical piece of evidence in Florida check fraud cases. It suggests that the suspects have the means to manufacture counterfeit payment instruments on demand. The officers also found multiple credit cards with various names in the vehicle. The officer returned to the driver to question him about the blank checks found near his seat. The driver claimed that the checks belonged to his cousin and that he was unaware of their specific nature. He tried to distance himself from the items and from Genesis Parrott. He told the officer, "I do not even know that girl, that is what I am trying to explain to you." The officer found it highly suspicious that a man would rent a high-performance car to drive a stranger to multiple banks. The driver insisted that they met through a mutual friend named Chris and he was just doing a favor. The intricate web of denials and the separation of the group allowed officers to compare their stories for inconsistencies. The narrative constructed by the police was that of a sophisticated group of travelers engaging in a scheme to defraud. The suspects were profiled as a classic check fraud ring utilizing a rental car to move quickly between jurisdictions. The green Hellcat was seen as a tool of the trade used to evade capture and impress potential recruits. The officers believed the group had successfully cashed 1 check in the Villages and were now attempting to double dip in Ocala. The bank manager stated that Regions Bank had flagged numerous checks similar to the ones the suspect was trying to cash. This statement implied a pattern of criminal behavior that extended far beyond the single transaction in the lobby. The legal statutes in Florida are specific regarding the possession and use of fraudulent financial documents. The suspects were facing charges under Florida Statute 817.034, which covers organized fraud. This statute is designed to prosecute those who engage in a systematic, ongoing course of conduct with intent to defraud. Additionally, they were looking at charges for possession of a counterfeit payment instrument under Statute 831.28. The presence of the blank checks in the vehicle provided the physical evidence needed for this charge. The officers believed they had enough probable cause to arrest all 4 occupants of the vehicle under the doctrine of constructive possession. Constructive possession allows the state to charge all individuals in a vehicle if the contraband is in a common area. Since the blank checks were in the center console area, they were accessible to the driver and the passengers. The officer explained the gravity of the situation to the group who were now seated on the curb. He told them, "I am investigating a big fraud case. There is a black male, 2 black females." He made it clear that their stories were not adding up and that they were all facing jail time. One of the passengers protested the collective punishment, stating, "Just because you guys are involved with her, how are we involved just driving her around?" The investigation revealed that Genesis was working as a caregiver and was wearing her work uniform. The medical scrubs fraud theory suggested that she used the uniform to appear trustworthy to bank tellers. Criminals often use disguises such as nurse uniforms or construction vests to lower the suspicion of victimized businesses. However, Genesis claimed she was simply on her way to or from work. She told the officer, "I work for kids at Children's Courtyard in Orlando." She offered to show her fingerprints appointment scheduled for the next day as proof of her employment. The officer remained skeptical and focused on the immediate felony investigation. Genesis continued to plead her case while sitting in the back of the patrol car. She asked the officer if she could smoke her nicotine vape to calm her nerves. The officer denied the request to maintain control of the suspect and the scene. He told her, "Don't be that guy, it is not that serious." Genesis retorted that to her the situation was indeed very serious as she was facing prison. She insisted that she had done nothing wrong and that the check was legitimate. She stated, "I did not do anything, I don't want to be questioned." The officer explained that she was being detained and that the investigation would continue at the police district. The 4 suspects were arrested and transported to the Marion County Jail for booking. The green Dodge Hellcat was towed from the scene to be impounded and processed for further evidence. The narrative of the police and the bank manager seemed airtight at the time of the arrest. They had the suspects, the vehicle, the rejected transaction, and the blank checks. The police body cam bank footage captured the entire sequence of events, from the initial stop to the final transport. The footage would later serve as a crucial piece of evidence in reviewing the conduct of the investigation. However, the certainty of the arrest began to crumble as the legal process moved forward. Defense attorneys and investigators looked closer at the specific checks Genesis was trying to cash. It was revealed that the checks were in fact valid instruments issued by a legitimate insurance company. Genesis Parrott had been telling the truth when she said she received them in the mail. The alert from Regions Bank stating the checks were already cashed was a systemic error. The bank system likely flagged the check numbers because of the attempted scans at the previous branches. When a teller scans a check and then rejects it, the system may still record the attempt. If the customer goes to another branch, the system sees the previous scan and flags it as a duplicate. This creates a false positive for fraud, known as a double presentment. The check fraud investigation was actually an investigation into a banking glitch. The blank checks found in the car were also determined to be legal. Owning blank check stock is not a crime unless there is proof of intent to print forgeries. The driver's claim that the checks belonged to a cousin was verified, and the intent to defraud could not be established. The charges against the group were eventually dismissed after the evidence was reviewed by the state attorney. The innocent bank fraud case highlighted the dangers of confirmation bias in police work. The officers operated on the premise that the bank manager was infallible. They interpreted the nervousness and confusion of the suspects as signs of guilt. The usual suspects narrative was applied to a group of young African Americans in a luxury car. The presence of the Hellcat rental and the cash checks twice allegation fit a pre-existing profile of criminal activity. The dismissal of the charges meant that Genesis Parrott and her friends were legally exonerated. However, the impact of the arrest on their lives was significant. They spent time in a county jail and had their mugshots published online. The stigma of being arrested for a bank scam can linger for years in background checks. The term banking while black is often used to describe situations where legitimate customers are treated as criminals. The suspects in this case felt that they were targeted because of their race and their vehicle. The case also brought attention to the issue of systemic issues in the banking industry. The reliance on automated fraud detection algorithms can lead to false accusations against innocent customers. A simple phone call to the insurance company by the bank manager could have verified the check. Instead, the manager chose to call the police and report a crime in progress. This decision set in motion a chain of events that cost 4 people their freedom for a time. The police officers were following the lead of the complainant but failed to conduct an independent verification of the theft. The broader impact of the Ocala fraud case serves as a lesson for both the public and law enforcement. For the public, it demonstrates the risks of handling financial transactions that have been flagged. If a bank refuses a check, it is often best to stop and resolve the issue with the issuer. Attempting to cash the same check at another branch mimics the behavior of criminals. This behavior, known as check washing or structuring, is a major red flag for investigators. Genesis Parrott's decision to go from Bellview to Ocala was the action that sealed her fate. For law enforcement, the case reinforces the need to look beyond the initial presentation of facts. The possession of multiple credit cards and blank checks is suspicious, but not illegal on its own. The context of the items and the intent of the possessor must be proven. The Hellcat rental scam theory was a hypothesis that did not withstand scrutiny. The officers did their duty to investigate, but the foundation of the investigation was flawed. The reliance on the statement of the bank manager without physical proof of forgery was a critical error. The video of the arrest has circulated online, drawing millions of views and comments. Viewers often debate the conduct of the officers and the reactions of the suspects. Some comments use terms like ratchet or ghetto fraud to describe the scene, reflecting deep societal biases. Others point out the injustice of the situation and the validity of the suspect's complaints. The phrase, "I know my rights," is often mocked in these videos, but in this case the suspect was right. She had the right to possess her own money and to travel freely. The case also touches on the phenomenon of fake nurse or scrub stethoscope fraud. This involves criminals dressing as healthcare workers to gain sympathy or trust. The fact that Genesis was actually a caregiver made the profiling even more poignant. She was not in a costume, she was in her work clothes. The collision of her reality with the police officer's suspicion created a tragedy of errors. The officers saw a disguise where there was only a uniform. They saw a getaway car where there was only a rental. In the aftermath of the dismissed charges fraud, the 4 individuals have returned to their lives. The legacy of the case remains in the legal precedents regarding probable cause and financial crimes. The Florida Communications Fraud Act requires a clear scheme to defraud, which was absent here. The checks were real, the money was owed, and the intent was lawful. The system failed to distinguish between a criminal conspiracy and a road trip to the bank. The complexity of the banking system means that legitimate checks can be flagged for dozens of reasons. A smudged routing number or a mismatch in the signature line can trigger a police response. The aggressive posture of banks in 2022 was a response to a spike in check fraud. However, this aggression often catches innocent bystanders in the net. The region's bank fraud protocol prioritized asset protection over customer service in this instance. The result was a waste of police resources and a violation of civil rights. The story of the green Hellcat in the region's bank parking lot is a modern cautionary tale. It warns against the assumption of guilt based on appearance and circumstance. It highlights the power of institutions to disrupt lives with a single erroneous report. The officers involved were doing the job they were trained to do, but the training did not account for this scenario. The lesson remains that in the digital age, a computer glitch can result in handcuffs. The $3,000 checks were eventually paid, but the cost to the reputation of the justice system was high. The final takeaway from the investigation is the importance of knowing the law, as Genesis claimed she did. Understanding the difference between detention and arrest is crucial. Knowing when to remain silent and when to explain can change the outcome of a stop. The suspects in this case talked to the police in an attempt to clear their names. Their statements were used to build a case against them that later fell apart. The paradox of the innocent suspect is that the more they try to explain, the more guilty they often appear. The sun set on Ocala that day, leaving 4 young people in a holding cell and a green car in an impound lot. The machinery of the criminal justice system had chewed them up and spit them out. The 2022 fraud case involving the innocent teens serves as a permanent record of a bad day in Florida. It is a story of checks that were real, crimes that were fake, and consequences that were all too true. The silence of the Hellcat was the only quiet part of a very loud mistake. The reverberations of that mistake continue to echo in the discussions about justice, race, and banking in America.